Right, it's 7 o'clock, so let's make a start. Welcome everyone to this evening's Audit Committee. Before we start, Andrew, can I ask you, as usual, to explain who is with us this evening?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So online, we've got Graham Cadle, Assistant Director Finance, Mark Thompson, Head of Corporate Finance, colleagues from EY, our external auditors, so Helen Thompson and Hannah Lill. Then officer colleagues from Customer Services, Claire Munster, Denise Penny and Michael Bateman. And we have David Clifton, who's streaming the meeting for us online this evening.
Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies?
Councillor Harper and Councillor Mayher.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay. And do we have any public or any member questions? No. Okay. And as this is an extraordinary meeting, the minutes of the last meeting will be reviewed at the next ordinary meeting. An update on the actions from last meeting has been circulated to members. Okay, so we'll get straight on with the first main item on the agenda, which is the audit results report and the financial statements for 2020-21. I want to take these as one item if we can. And I think in terms of our committee, our responsibilities here are to consider what sort of assurances we have that the financial statements have been prepared properly, prepared fairly, that appropriate accounting policies have been followed, and whether there are any concerns arising either from the financial statements or from the audit that we should be escalating as a committee. So I don't want to spend too much time looking at the individual figures and getting into the detail. It's more about the process and whether we can get assurance that they've been prepared properly and audited properly. So shall I hand over to Helen and Graham, I guess?
Thanks, Chair. So if I get started then just talking about the audit results report. Chair, can I just check, do you want to take comments on both papers together then, if that's the case?
Yes, I want to do both together, yeah.
Okay, so I'll get started and then Graham will pick up. So in terms of our audit results report, clearly the committee saw a version of this back in March 2022. We have updated the paper and I'm going to work on the basis that all members have read the audit results that's included in the papers. We are very largely complete. I really hate to have to say this, but the issue that remains outstanding is in relation to the pension fund. However, we have spoken with the auditors of the pension fund and we have a clear timescale from them for completing their work and for the receipt of the letter. So as long as everything goes to plan on their side, we will receive the letter on, they are saying, on the 29th of March. That gives us a short window in which we can complete the work for the end of March, assuming that there are no other events that take place. So that's the one piece of outstanding work. In relation to infrastructure assets, which I feel we've discussed at every meeting since last March, we have completed the work in relation to that. We are satisfied that the updated disclosures in the financial statements are appropriate and are in line with the statutory instrument and the SIP for amendment. And then I think the other point that I would probably just want to draw to your attention that's changed from the version that you would have seen a year ago is some updates in the section around property, plant and equipment, where we've completed our work in all areas. And we have also updated the sort of schedule of errors, as it were. So section 4 of the report that has the audit differences. So that includes a number of the misstatements. The committee may recall that when we presented the audit plan at the last meeting, we explained that there would be a change in our testing materiality threshold and that it was a consequence of the errors that we'd identified, or the number and the spread of the errors that we'd identified as part of this current audit, which clearly the committee wouldn't have seen since in its entirety. So that is also included. There is a summary on page 12 and there is more detail on that. I'm rapidly trying to flick through the report in section 4, which is on starts on page 40. I wasn't really proposing to say any much more in terms of introduction. I'll just check with Hannah that there isn't something that I've forgotten. She's shaking her head at me, which is always good. So that's really an introduction from our side. Graham, shall I pass to you to give your thoughts?
Thank you, Helen. So pretty similar. Following the EY document, you can see there's a detailed statement of accounts. As Helen explained, these were presented to committee last March. They have been updated where further adjustments, misstatements have been found, and they now reflect that final position. Just to add, what we're asking of committee tonight, if they're in agreement, is to note the accounts, but also to agree delegation for once the issue with the pensions that Helen has outlined is resolved, that the chair can make the final sign off of the accounts in consultation with the Chief Financial Officer, Graham. So we're asking for committee's agreement on that basis.
Okay, thank you both for that introduction. So I'll open it up to members. So this is questions and comments on both the statement of accounts and on the audit report. Okay, Councillor Davis. David.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about infrastructure. No, insofar as the assessment of the new way of recognising infrastructure and the CIF changes, my reading of that was that we are compliant, acceptably compliant now, but there are changes required to be made in terms of granularity. Are those planned and expected to be complete in time for the 2025 deadline, as I read that?
Shall I start, Helen? So CIPFA introduced an interim arrangement to allow, I guess, to recognise the complexity of the nature of the issue and not to make councils go for a whole lot of work that really wouldn't add value whilst they sorted out a longer term solution. So we've worked very well, the finance team with Helen and her team, to now meet those interim requirements. We're still waiting to understand what the full long-term requirement will be. We are working on the basis of what we can to get in the right place for those, and once they're in place, we'll work quickly to make sure we meet those.
If I may just add, Chair, Graham's absolutely right. We don't have a great deal of clarity yet about what the long-term solution will look like, and therefore, whilst we've recommended that the council considers the accounting records, there is clearly a balance between doing that and spending time on going backwards. What we've suggested, and I think what we've agreed with Graham and his team, is to ensure that from this point onwards, effectively, the council has access, is keeping more specific records in relation to the expenditure on infrastructure assets that is incurred from this point through. And then as soon as we do have that sort of clarity on a way forward, and there's 3 different options I think being considered at the moment, then we will sort of work together again to sort of say, okay, what does that now need to look like? So it's difficult to say at this precise point that we've got matters in hand, but we've got them as in hand as we can do given the information that we have.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yeah, Maria?
Yes, thank you for following up on why the pension fund hasn't been signing off its accounts. So we have been asking about this for quite a number of years, and it seems now that it's come to light that it's because Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead haven't signed off their accounts. And I'm quite disturbed by this. So we haven't been keeping an eye on their accounts because we didn't think that was the issue. We thought there was an issue with, I don't know, some other set of auditors. So do we know why Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead haven't signed off their accounts? And I've been checking, they haven't signed it off back to 2019-20. So did we know that they haven't signed off their accounts back to 2019-20? I've just checked this evening just to be sure. So I'm really worried that we haven't been aware of the risks associated with the fact that it's our Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead not signing off their accounts. And this has passed under the radar for quite a number of these meetings and therefore quite a number of years.
If I may pick up, Chair, I think we have actually said that the issue with the pension fund accounts, and on a number of occasions we've said that the pension fund accounts are largely completed, but they were unable to be issued or completed because they are linked with the delays in the accounts of the administering body, which is the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. So I think that has been discussed at these meetings, and we have been aware of that. And I know that both Graham Cadle and Graham Ebers have been discussing this as well through Berkshire Treasurers.
Well,
I beg to differ on that.
Maria, could I just let Graham Ebers come in as well, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, as to the best of my knowledge and discussions with Helen and with my colleagues around Berkshire Treasurers, the issue has actually been the particular wording in the letter from Deloitte that they sent to the respective auditors. What has become, what has been illuminated more recently is the reason for those caveated words are linked to the Royal Borough's closing of accounts. But I'm not entirely sure that's the case if Helen's had assurances from Deloitte that she'll receive the wording that she needs by the end of March. Then it does appear that there was a perception at a period of time that it was wholly linked to Royal Borough's accounts, but in the main, it's been Deloitte's been able to provide a sufficient set of assuring words, which somehow along the way got linked to, but they can't provide them because the Royal Borough's accounts aren't signed. But I still, from what I understand, that is not the case, and Deloitte's are able to provide the wording even if the Royal Borough's accounts haven't been signed. Helen, is that right?
Yes. So if we go back to 2019-20 as the starting point, as Councillor G has referenced, those accounts remain unsigned, although I thought they were quite close to signing the 2019-20 accounts for RBWM. In 2019-20, there was a delay in receiving the letter from the pension fund auditor, but they provided an uncaveated letter before they signed the 2019-20 accounts. Now, I'm not the auditor for, I don't work for Deloitte, and I'm not the auditor for Royal Borough, Windsor and Maidenhead, so I don't know why there was a difference taken for 2020-21, but we received a letter from them about a year ago, which we have used to complete our procedures as far as we can. But the issue was that the letter contained a caveat that said that material differences could still arise because while audit procedures were ongoing. Now, it became clear relatively early on this year, 2022, that in a couple of meetings that they were really talking about delays in the audit of the administering body, not the delays in the audit of the pension fund. However, until they are able to provide us with a letter that removes that caveat, we're unable to rely on it. And I think we discussed at the previous meeting whether there were, or we have discussed on a couple of occasions, whether there are alternative procedures that we could do. That has proved a lot more complex than perhaps we thought and would take a lot of time and cost to do. So at this point, we've not explored that further. As Graham has mentioned, and as I said, we have been in touch with Deloitte again just recently. They've provided us with a clear timetable for completing their work that includes their sort of review process. So Hannah and I are reasonably confident that this is a timetable that will be met. However, that is where we are at.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've checked.
Sorry, can I just bring Maria back in?
Yeah.
Yes, so at the last meeting, we had this discussion, and the way that it was presented in the last meeting is that there was a problem with the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead's accounts to do with previous accounting. And then I pointed out that in the meeting in December of the pension fund committee, which I attend, that they'd said they can't sign off until the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead are signed off. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a risk that we have not been looking at, because what is the risk with the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead not signing off their accounts? So in the meeting of the pension committee in December 2022, it says the recommendations are that they're approving the draft pension fund accounts for 2021-22, also 2019-20, 2020 and 2021, because there's been amendments, and notes that although the accounts remain as draft officially until the administering authority's accounts are formally signed off, the auditors have recommended that these have been reviewed and are fit for public disclosure. So my concern is that we've not been looking at the risk of Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead signing off the accounts, because we don't actually know why they've been signing off. And that, to me, is a grave concern, really, that we haven't been keeping our eyes on why this is happening. Why do we have to wait until Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead sign their accounts off? Why aren't they signing their accounts off? I have checked some of it. It's because members of the public have raised objections about the accounts, but I don't know for sure because they haven't said.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I mean, the way I understand it is that we no longer have to wait till they sign off their main accounts, as long as EY get the appropriate letter without the big caveat in it. But I take the point that, perhaps the reasoning behind why it's been so delayed, we haven't quite, as a committee, we haven't been so on that as we might have done. I don't know if Helen or Graham want to say any more on that in response to Maria's points. David.
Obviously wasn't on the committee back then, but we signed off the accounts the previous years. And I assume there was an uncaveated letter received from Deloitte in previous years. We clearly haven't got a good answer why it's a caveated letter this time round, and now they're providing an uncaveated one, so that's fine. I would suspect new partner or new junior analyst who's written some words to cover their bottoms has caused a problem without expecting to. So I don't think there's a risk with the RBWM accounts directly, because it has been reported here. And I confess my understanding was it was related to the main accounts rather than the pension accounts, although I appreciate Maria's recollection may vary and is more competent in it than I am. So I don't think we have a general risk, but I appreciate that risk has to be brought before us if there is a specific risk.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Mike?
Thank you, Rachel. I've got quite a lot of points, but I'm going to try, as I went review the accounts, but I'll try to stick at the ones at a higher level, the more general points, taking account of what you said earlier on. If I start with the auditor's report, there are significant errors. You mentioned it earlier on, Helen. I suppose what I'd like, in this initial point, to make sure management now have appropriate accounting policies, procedures, staff have had the training and now have the relevant expertise so that these don't repeat again in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's the first point.
Graham Cadle, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think we've understood now, bearing in mind the timing of this, the requirement for a bit more investment in the finance team, and I know that's been brought up in this committee before, so there is additional resources in the team, as well as improved processes and quality assurance. Obviously, impacts such as COVID had an impact on the work as it was going on. So there's a number of things in place that give us confidence that the errors will be reduced and lessons learned, processes and quality assurance in place. And I think we're already seeing that in some of the early work that we're doing at the moment in future years.
Thank you. So moving on to the unadjusted errors that are on page 44 of the report. Were these of the sort that's really a disagreement between yourselves as auditors and management, or are they extrapolated differences? Perhaps you could give us a little bit more of the background, Helen, on those, and then management give their comments, please.
Sure. So in terms of the unadjusted differences, the first, sorry, I'm sort of juggling screens. 2 of them are, 3 of them are set out as judgmental differences. So this is where there is a difference between the valuation on land and buildings, one in PPE, one in IP, which relate to effectively, if I could summarise it, a difference in opinion between valuers. So the council's valuers have identified a valuer. These are properties that we are then asked our valuation specialists to look at. our valuation specialists use a set of assumptions, which to a certain extent are localised, but not always as local as your own valuers will do. And there are differences that are then identified that effectively it's outside of our range. So we don't come up with a precise number, we come up with a range, and we look to see whether the value falls within that. And in these instances, the value was just outside the range, but not of such a magnitude that it caused us to look at it in a lot more detail or require an adjustment. The Goodwin impact, and I may need a little bit of help from Hannah here, this is in relation to pension liabilities. So there have been a number of cases in relation to pension liabilities that are taken in, some of which are taken into account in calculating the pension liability. The McLeod judgment is one of them that's been mentioned a lot in previous years. Goodwin is another one. They're usually related to age discrimination. And this happens to be one that's not necessarily factored in by your actuaries, but it's, again, it is not of a magnitude that we would expect the accounts to be adjusted. The capital receipts in advance, this one is a projected, or another word is I think you used it, Mike, is extrapolated difference. So that's where we identified an error in the testing. We sort of looked at it to say, could it be material if we took it across the whole of the population? It wasn't. So it's where we would have selected a sample of items. It would have been one of our representative sample items, so probably a smallish number that you then extrapolate across the whole of the population to come up with a how wrong might it be if you applied that same error across the whole of the untested population. Again, you can see from the number it's not material, and we would never expect the council to adjust or indeed to do more work in that instance. Had, of course, it been extrapolated as a larger number, we'd have done more work. Does that help? Hannah, is there anything I've missed in that?
No, you covered everything. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the first two differences, the management stick by the assumptions you've used?
Yeah, I would classify these differences in two ways. One is around efficiency of the amount of work involved to correct, find and correct and what have you, given the magnitude. So they'll be part of the lessons learned to make sure we minimise the chance of them appearing again. Mm-hmm. The two on land valuations, I would say we're right and they're wrong.
It's an art, not a science.
Well, and it's in the world of professional valuers who are obviously members of their own institutes and hold dearly their professional opinions. And I've listened to both sides, and from this council's CFO perspective, I think our local valuers have a more in-depth understanding of the value than maybe a more remote global sort of valuation.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted it minuted, actually, so I thought that was fun. Moving on to the financial statements, the annual accounts, there were a few general things I noticed. One, there was some comments, I think, in the narrative reporting quite early on, but also in notes, that it looks as if it was written a few months after the original year end. And obviously we're 3 months on now. So we talk about, I think there was something as early as on page 75. We talk about heading into the 21-22 year. Well, actually, we're just heading into the 23-24 year. So I think we just need to review the notes to make sure we bring it up to date with some of our comments. There are a number of rounding differences, unfortunately. So I think there needs to be a look through the accounts again. In fact, quite a lot of those balance sheet headings don't agree to the notes. It's only 1 or 2 or 3 digits out, but they should all agree, stating the obvious. And there were various notes to the accounts where we provided the note for the Woking and Borough Council figures, but we didn't provide the supporting note for the group figure. So I'd expect the note to provide both where the numbers are different. So if Graham's department could look back and get that fixed, just matter of the professional look at the accounts and things. I did have quite a lot of other points, but I don't think this is the forum, I understand. I suppose one thing I would like to know is what that unfunded pension is, because I don't think it's the teachers, is it? Because we account for that as a DC scheme. I don't know what the unfunded amounts are in the pension note. That was one thing I was quite interested about.
Okay, so if Helen, you want to come in, and then perhaps Graham on the unfunded pension.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up actually on Mike's point on the rounding errors. So the set of accounts that's in front of you is the set that we sent across to one of our teams to do the casting and consistency checks. So we're aware of them. There are quite a few of those, and there are some where the notes don't necessarily match back through. So I think we sent some information through to Mark this morning to sort of pull to get that sorted, because we did pick up on that and work our way through. I'm particularly keen that we don't have rounding errors on primary statements because there were so many. We'd like to try and get it fixed, but we'll see where we get to. In terms of your comment on on notes, some of which didn't include group and some which did. Thank you for raising that. We will go back and check. There are the SIPFA guidance notes are actually not always entirely clear. So there are certain of the notes where it appears to say that you don't need the group as well as the single entity, but we need to. It's probably a good check for us to go back and make sure that we have got that right, because it's the sort of thing that doesn't look right and does get picked up on reviews. So thank you for that. In terms of the unfunded pension, I'll let Graham have a think about it, but it's also something that sort of trying to remember back ourselves, but we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, just to add, if you've done some work and you found some notes, be happy to check them through outside of the meeting and give you a bit of feedback, hopefully to give you some confidence around what they are and that we pick them up, but also to make sure you haven't got something that we didn't pick up. So that'd be really helpful. Is Mark online? Are you able to help out with the pension? If not, it may be something we'll come back to you on.
Yeah. Which page was it?
I'd have to look through my notes, but it would be in the detailed pension note.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about the pension fund, what they look at in terms of what's funded and unfunded is the value of the future liabilities versus the value of the assets of the pension fund, and then any difference, which I think would be where you're referring to the unfunded. That's where the council will make an annual contribution that's part of our budget in terms of contributing towards that. They call it a pension deficit between the asset value and the
often
liability.
A disclosure of an unfunded scheme is where you owe a previous employee, very often it's a senior employee actually, an amount, but it's not necessarily part of a pension scheme. So there's another liability there, and typically companies will accrue that. It's very often at a senior level. When someone leaves, for example, they promise to pay their medical cover for the rest of their life, or there might be a pension that's not in the set scheme. So I think from memory it was just said unfunded pension, and that sort of just came to me as something a bit I wasn't expecting.
Is it the unfunded pension payments? Is that fine?
I'll see if I'll have a look.
I've just had a look. I think it might be referring to the teachers' pension fund. I've just sort of done a find on unfunded. Yeah. Does that sound right, Mike?
Well, I thought about that, but then later on we said we treated it as a DC scheme, so I wasn't expecting any balance sheet amounts relating to that.
Yes, indeed. So the
I
teachers'
just thought
pension,
it was a bit strange.
That's the teachers' pension scheme is a separate thing, really. So that's the only. Let me just see. That says unfunded.
Yeah. Anyway, perhaps Graham could come back to me or Matt. That'd be very useful.
Yeah, is that okay? I'm trying to desperately find it, but if we can come back, that would be
possibly page 123. Graham, there's a present value of unfunded obligation mentioned.
I also, I've thought something else actually. The comprehensive income and expenditure statement, I think it's on what you call a funded basis, but I couldn't find any definition actually in your list of definitions or accounting policies what funded basis was, and I thought that would be quite useful actually. Okay. Someone like me who's not used to local authority accounts, I thought, that's a bit. I understood the reconciliations between the statutory basis, but we didn't actually define what that is. So I thought that might be quite useful for the reader.
We can add that. And just on your comment on the initial narrative, we did notice the narrative was out of date.
Yes, good.
I don't think any of it's necessarily wrong. It's just the context. So what the plan to do was to read through it and probably add a para beforehand that just explains that context is probably kind of more efficient way of doing it than rewriting it. But we picked up that we need to have a look at that. Thank you.
Okay, I just had a quick question. Are you done, Mike? Sorry.
You carry on this.
Yeah, okay. You've got time, yeah. It was just on the bank reconciliations point. So this is page 32. Now, bank recs are sort of one of the bedrocks of basic financial control. So this came up the previous year as well. And, I note in the report it says limited progress is made. Now, I know that the values are not big of these, but can we get some assurance that those controls will be put back in place and that those recs will be done regularly, and we'll get some more assurance on that?
Absolutely, Chair. I mean, it did come up in March last year as well. So, we're now. It wasn't that there was any problems with it; just wasn't done as regularly as possible, as you say, this as appropriate. The sums are small, but we've now got that in place that happens on a more regular basis, so we can give you that assurance that won't be an issue going forward.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that. So there's a difference, isn't there, which is adjusted for 0.26 million, but I don't know what effect that has, and that's due to the lack of reconciliation. So it looks to me like there might be a difference. I'm hoping that's not hitting income, that it's just a switch between balance sheet accounts. If it is hitting income, then irrespective of materiality, 260,000 is still a lot for this council to be losing, or to lose track of, if you like. So on top of that, I would like assurance about what that adjustment is. Also, just following up, I think the first year I was on this committee, there were quite a number of differences adjusted for, and I did ask at the time if the finance department was under-resourced, and it seems to me that this is an ongoing problem. So I take what Graham has said about funding or resourcing the finance department. It's absolutely critical. Things start going pear-shaped in finance, it can just ripple throughout the organisation. And I really would like to see assurances in writing from the finance department that it will be resourced properly, because to me it's really critical. So I would like to ask both Grahams to actually state in writing that, as far as they're concerned, the finance department is resourced properly, so that we don't have errors, we don't have differences as far as possible. And the second thing is, I went to the pension Royal Berkshire Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead pension committee meeting today, and they have had the next valuation, and I'm just wondering whether anything in there might be something that we would need to reflect in the account. So on page 56 of the accounts, 128 in the pack, it says that the next valuation being due to be completed on 31st of March 2022. Well, it has come back, and there have been some adjustments. There have been some adjustments to the contributions that employers are expected to pay. This is based on the 2022 valuation, and we are looking at the 2020-21 account. So there might be nothing in there, but my pension accounting is pretty rubbish. So I don't know whether that valuation is going to be something that the auditors will look at. As I say, it has changed the contribution rate, and they've made some other comments as well. So I don't know what the answer to that is.
Thank you. Could I just bring Mike in before we go to officers?
Yeah, I could pick that up, actually. If there's been a formal actuarial evaluation, then since the year end, you should note it in your pension fund note. So
no adjustments, hopefully.
No, it would be a non-adjusting item, but you should note the last formal actuarial evaluation and give some narrative on it. Sorry, I did have one other point, if I may. Well, I've got the phone there.
Okay, go on then. Yeah.
On the collection fund, so that's on page 120 in the accounts, 192 of the pack. And again, it's really just for minuting. And I apologise if my understanding of this isn't quite as it. We collect business rates on behalf, I understand, of the government, and then they divvy out again. There is a deficit on the business rates. If you look down at the bottom of the notes of 29 million there, but I think there is comments that that would be covered, I think, by contributions from central government, if I understand it. And I just did wonder whether that's really an adjusting thing. In other words, it's not really a contingent asset. We would know with enough certainty that if funds were coming from central government to cover that, whether we should have anticipated that in the accounts. If not, if you can explain, and then it should be minuted in the notes because that's quite a big number.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we've got a few things for people to come back on there. So we've got the adjusted error of 260k as a result of the bank reconciliations. We've got the commitment on the finance resourcing that Councillor G has asked for. Any comments on the latest valuation of the pension? And then Mike's point about the collection of funds. So shall I start with Graham Cadle and then go to Helen?
Yes, so I think we'll come back to you on the 260.
I could add something to that, Graham,
okay,
to give committee some assurance. What part of that difference relates to where the council, particularly around the town centre, for example, we take deposits from tenants. So previously the council hadn't recognised that income in our ledger because we treated it because it wasn't the council's, we were holding it on behalf of the tenant. And further work with the auditors, we agreed that actually we should be recognising that in our accounts. So there was an adjustment to our cash balances and also an adjustment to creditors. So there was zero impact on our income or bottom line. It was just to recognise that. So it agreed back to the reconciliation of all the bank accounts we hold, including on behalf of tenants.
Okay, and then back to Graham on the other points.
So on the pensions position, we haven't been issued formally with the updated position, the valuation. But once that comes through, and I'm aware, as you say, Councillor G, that that information I think is held, then we'll be able to make any adjustment or reflection. But at this point, it hasn't. I think it's still in the thrones of being formally finalised their side. So it hasn't been issued to us formally as yet.
It was agreed today in the committee meeting, so I think you should probably ask them for it.
Councillor, might we?
I'm a bit ahead of you, but only because the meeting was held at 4 o'clock.
Can I just come in on that one?
Sure.
If I may, because my hand went up at that pretty much at the same time as Graham's, I think. So this is an issue that we were aware of. Or we are aware of. We knew it was coming. What we didn't know was how significant the impact might be in terms of the change in the triennial valuation. So our understanding from sort of other councils is that there's more of a difference perhaps than councils had and pension funds and councils had anticipated. So it is something that all auditors are considering in terms of the impact on the accounts. I tend to agree with Mike in terms of how it might be treated, but we obviously need to go through a process and ensure that we treat it consistently across all of our audits, and also that we get some consistency across the local authority audit population as a whole as well. So that is something that's on our radar. I wasn't necessarily going to bring it to the committee's attention tonight as a potential other issue, but it is all linked up with where we are with the pension fund, and it is something that we will take into account before we finalise.
Okay, thank you. And Graham Cadle, could we have some comments on the finance department resourcing, and then also the point about the collection of funds?
Yeah, in terms of resourcing, there's obviously a timing issue with the accounts, and I think we had a similar conversation last March when we went through this before, in that I think there was a reduction in resources a few years ago that has been invested in. Resources have come into place. I started November before last, and resources have come into place since then. They are being trained up and processes being put in place. I won't ask Helen or Hannah to comment, but I think even they're seeing in the work we're doing at the moment a much improved resourcing position and ability to keep up with work. And personally, my own opinion is things like the work we've done on infrastructure and the speed that's been reflected is a good start of an indication of that. So I'm confident the right resources are in place. We continue to develop and train staff and learn in terms of processes as we have from the audit process we're going through today.
So as long as that gets minuted, that there are adequate resources, then that will do for in writing.
Thank you.
And the collection fund comments?
Yeah, I don't know whether Mark's got anything more to add. As it says in the notes, clearly it's to do with an increase off the back of COVID and the grants that were given. Grant has been given, but as in accounting terms for these collection funds, they don't sit there. They sit in separate reserves. So I'm not sure whether that. I think you kind of explained that to us, but I mean that's the accounting treatment for these. I don't know whether there was something further you was looking in respect of that.
No, it just comes up as a large deficit. So what you're saying, there is revenue on different lines in the accounts.
Yeah.
So possibly then there could be a note under that note saying, in effect, that really. So the reader doesn't think there's a large deficit on collections.
Okay, rather than reflecting to point 3, maybe make that a bit more explicit rather than having to look at note 3. Okay,
yeah, because I interpreted.
Don't see that as a problem.
Yeah, I interpreted that there was income coming in the next period, and I wondered why we hadn't included it in the account. So I guess if I've come up with that, someone perhaps else would as well.
We can make a note.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to the recommendations, any other comments or questions from members, please? Yeah, Mike?
This probably shows my ignorance as an engineer rather than an accountant. On page 91, the Group Comprehensive Income and Expenditure Statement, there's been a dramatic difference in the 2019-20 and the 2021 fortunes of adult social care, doubling of the gross expenditure and a huge increase in the gross income. But I didn't necessarily see that explained away anywhere.
Graham or Mark, are you able to comment on that?
Page was that? Was it 91, did you say?
Page 91 or 19, depending on which page number you're looking at. The line adult social care, I like to look for differences from one year to the next, and that just sticks out like a sore thumb. But I don't know why.
We could have a look in detail. Probably a couple of things would be natural inflation in terms of in adult social care. That's an area where the council
not a doubling is natural inflation, is it?
No. Some of that will be an element of that in terms of increase in expenditure and income. Some of it will be related to COVID grants. So there was a lot of COVID schemes in adult social care in terms of giving money to around discharge and beds, etc. So some of that may be related to that, but we can do some analysis in terms of a bit more further detail.
Yeah, the net, just make sure I'm looking at the right figure that you are. The net figure is reasonable against each other. It's the gross figures, isn't it?
It's the gross figures, yeah.
Yeah, the gross figures, which is probably to do with some grants, I guess. But as Mark says, we can have a look at that.
But with a massive movement like this, these presumably become public documents.
Yeah.
So if I was a member of the public, I want to know what's going on there, rather than how much money I'm spending on potholes.
Yeah. Can I answer some of it? Because if you look at the total gross, it moves from 370 to 410, which is, in terms of the whole of the council's expenditure, is nowhere near as significant as what you're pointing out, a doubling. So if you look at particular lines like corporate and children's services, their gross figures have gone down quite significantly. So that tells me a sizable part of the answer will be restructuring, where some services were shown under one directorate or one category and have been moved to another. That's bound to be part of the explanation.
Okay, so with a massive restructuring causing movements like that in the fortunes of one directorate, I would have thought some explanation would be appropriate. Did have another question.
Can I just follow up on that? Because if they're not comparable, because there's been a restructuring, then Mike's point is very valid in that the figures should be comparable from year to year. I don't think you can have a massive restructuring and then change the numbers and then say, oh, well, it's all fine and hunky-dory because the totals are the same. That's not reasonable.
Yeah, I think maybe one way you can address it, well, one way would be to restate the prior year if it is done on a completely different basis. But assuming the reallocations, if you like, are not material, then maybe it should be covered in the narrative report. So the narrative of the report at the moment, we talk about actual expenditure against budget. Actually, to the outside world, are they really interested in budget? But anyway, that's the way it's done. So maybe we ought to have a section really comparing actual current year to actual prior year, and then you can bring out the reason for the differences. If some of it's not material, it's reallocations, then fine, you can comment on that. If it is hugely material, it probably should be restating, actually, to be honest.
Okay, that sounds like a sensible way forward. If we could get some additional analysis on that point.
Yeah. But I think it's a very fair point, Mike.
And then Helen as well, please.
Yes, sorry. So just to say that if you look at back at page 91 or 19, it does actually say restated in 1920. So, and we will have checked that. So I don't think it is the restatement that causes it, although we might go back and just double check. I suspect the issue is much more likely, as Mark and Graham have alluded to, is that there were a significant number of grants that came in that were aligned to adult social care. So I think it might be that, but we will go back. I'll go back and check in our work, but those comparatives say restated, and we will have audited that. So I don't think it's the restatement that's causing the issue.
Okay, thank you.
That's good news then, isn't it? So I think you just need to bring it out in your narrative report.
Yeah, okay,
So
thank you.
Good news.
Thanks for that. Mike, did you have one other point?
I have another point, yes. Again, it may be me misunderstanding things, but on the following page 20, about a third of the way down the page, it says movement in reserves during 2021. Then it says surplus in brackets and deficit not in brackets. I assume that is setting the agenda of how I read these figures. So I'm wondering why it is that convention has changed on page 22 when it becomes a group load in where surplus is now not in brackets and the deficit is. So it makes it very difficult to understand the pages when the whole convention has changed between one page and another.
Okay, so I think that those kind of things will be picked up in the review that Helen mentioned earlier, where EY will go through with a fine-tooth comb and pick up anything where there's any little errors. It's quite easy to get the brackets wrong. I'm not sure if it's wrong in this case, but I suspect that review will pick up anything like that. But if they're both reserve statements, they should, I think, match in terms of where the brackets go. So I think you're right that may be an error there.
Yeah, because I was looking at one of the figures where the change is something like 30-odd%. The figure at the bottom of the page, or page 21.
Yeah, so I think what it's saying is on page 22, it says surplus, and then the deficit is in brackets, whereas on the previous page it's the other way around. Yeah, okay, we'll take that. Okay, any other comments before we go on to the recommendations? No? Okay.
Oh, sorry, yes, I did have it.
Okay, go on then. Then we need to move on, thanks.
Yes, appreciate that. There's a column called unusable reserves, so I looked that up as to what it means. As I understand it, this is the valuation of things we might be able to sell if we wanted to, but we can't. It's not realisable cash today. I was wondering how the figure of 366,178 at the bottom of the page has gone up by 33% in a year. That's a big change in valuation of property PPE, isn't it?
So some of that will relate to property valuation increases. Again, we can
sorry, whose property valuation, EY's or the council's? Things that there were some differences in the earlier report.
Council's.
This will be the final agreed valuations with EY.
Right. So property's gone up by 33% in the last year?
So that'll be an element of it. So also within unusable reserves. I can't remember which page it is. It's later in the.
I've just got it. It's one.
There's
three.
There's a number of unusable reserves that make up that balance, which we can maybe give some analysis of that, because some of them are required under statutory accounting for local government. For example,
the reference to note 36, which I found of absolutely no use whatsoever. Reference to note 36.
Note 132, if you can see that, Mike.
Yeah, 133, 132, note 23 as a breakdown of unusable reserves.
Yeah.
Okay, well, perhaps to avoid, we do need to move on because we've got a lot more to get through. So perhaps Mark and Graham, if I could ask you to just have a look at that and provide some analysis for us after the meeting, that would be really helpful. Mike?
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask one final question? Infrastructure assets, what are the actual entries that we have posted with regard to infrastructure assets in the year? Because it wasn't clear to me at all looking at the notes. I know you can only do movements based on net book value, I understand all that, but I wasn't sure actually what entries were finally put through the books.
Graham, are you able to answer that?
In terms of the audit issue around infrastructure, there was no changes we had to make in terms of any accounting journals. So everything the council had put through was correct.
And what were those entries? And what were those entries? Sorry, Mark.
Well, in the main, when the council spend money on infrastructure, that goes through our capital programme and increases the balance sheet value in terms of that infrastructure asset.
Yeah, I just thought it was.
The entries are included on page 142 in the new note around infrastructure assets. So there were additions in 2021 of 23 million and depreciation of just under 6 million, and then some other movements in cost.
And what are the other movements?
Without going back and looking at the working papers, I'm not good. I think it was transfer. No, that's additions. Hannah, can you recall from looking at the paper? Because off the top of my head, I'd need to go away and look.
Okay, I think that was the bit confused me. It was such a large figure. I saw the additions and the depreciation. 20 million was quite a bit, and because of the issues with this particular area, that was part of the thing that concerned me.
The other movements will relate to where an asset has become operational. So it moves from asset under construction into infrastructure asset because it's operational. So the council, we've spent a lot of money in infrastructure in terms of some of the major strategic roads that we've been building as part of our strategic development locations.
Okay, I think something like that, such a material number, again, it would assist the reader if it's 20 million to just say what it is, other than just say it's other. I think that would help the reader a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So we've got a few things for officers to come back to us on in terms of analysis, and then we've got a few changes that we want to see through in some of the detail. Can I also add that could we just remove the word chairman on page 87? That would be great. Thank you, Chair. Chair is fine. So can we move to the recommendations then? So I'm on page 71 of the pack. So recommendation 1 is to note the statement of accounts. Sorry, Maria?
Could we say, given the fact that we're going to go back and have a look at quite a few of those, could we amend that to draft?
Recommendation 1?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take that point first then. So do we agree that we would like to change the recommendation 1 to note the latest draft statement of accounts? Are people in agreement with changing that recommendation? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, thank you. And then recommendation 2 then is to approve delegation for the signing of the 2021 accounts to myself as chair of the audit committee in consultation with Graham as chief finance officer on the basis that we get remaining assurances from the auditor of the pension fund. So could I see a show of hands of all those in favour?
Yeah, can I just make a comment? Sure. Given that these are draft statements of accounts, I'm not trying to be funny about this or anything, and that there are a lot of notes to be changed, and there are quite a few numbers to be changed and clarified, and we've asked questions about the restating. My view would be that we shouldn't be approving this delegation. So before the meeting, initially I thought we shouldn't do it at all. Then I thought, well, maybe we could do it if they were signed off before the 4th of May, when there will be a change in councillors anyway. However, given the discussion this evening, my view is that they're not in a position to be delegated. I don't know what your view is as chair.
My view is that anything we've discussed tonight is not particularly material. It's to aid the reader of the accounts, or it's to check, casting errors or rounding errors and the things that make the accounts clearer. The only material outstanding thing that we need is for the auditors to get their assurance on the pension fund. So personally, I would be happy for this committee to delegate that. That would be my view. Other thoughts?
Rachel, and would you be happy if that were to go over into the next council year?
Yes.
So for the new chair, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We'd have to be mindful that it could potentially, I mean, hopefully it won't be going on that long, but yes, that's potentially what could happen, yeah.
Could we say then, provided that they're signed before a change of council?
Okay, what do other members think? Well, one, are we happy to delegate to the chair? And two, are there any comments about whether there should be time limit on that? David?
I think we've spent a lot of time discussing this in various meetings, and I'm very happy that what we've got left is not material. And Rachel, I know you've done an excellent job and fastidious in what you're doing, so I'm quite happy to delegate the authority to you. And to the wider question about time limits, the audit committee will meet fairly soon after the new council is formed anyway, so I would suggest that delegation is going to be rescinded or not at that next meeting in the new council year when the chair is appointed. So I don't see a need to protect ourselves in that respect, because it's not like a new chair could go rogue on May the 5th because the new chair won't have been elected except by this committee, at which point we could say we're not going to let you delegate that authority. So I understand the caution, but I don't think it's needed.
So actually, naturally, it happens anyway, is what you're saying, because there won't be a chair after May the 5th, essentially, until the committee meets. So if that makes sense, good point. Okay, so can I see a show of hands then on recommendation 2 as it currently stands? Okay, anyone against? Anyone abstaining? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, I think it was worth spending that time. Thank you for bearing with us on that. It is a very important item, so thank you for spending the time. We do have quite a lot of other items to get through, so let's move swiftly on to the complaints report. So again, thinking about what our role here is. So I think it's not something we will probably be looking at in the future under our new terms of reference, but if we need to be happy that there are appropriate policies in place on complaints and gain some assurance that complaints are being dealt with properly, and to pick up obviously any additional kind of risks that are arising from this. So who is going to introduce this item for us? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Claire Munzer, as Andrew said at the beginning, and I'm the customer relations manager, and I've got Dan with me today, Danette, and Michael. We're going to just show a couple of our slides, and Danette's going to go over an overview of what we've got, and then Michael will talk about children's, because he's the children's service manager for complaints as well.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you? Sorry, very briefly. I should have said it. Just please take it as read that we've all read it. So if you could just pick out the really key points that you want to draw our attention to, that would be great. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. I know which pages they are, and I can go through them as Danette is talking. So we will start on page, in your packs, it will be 226. So that's just this is our high level overview. So Danette, over to you.
Okay. Hello everyone. So I'll focus first on the what I think is statistically significant. Is that for show, Claire? Are you able to show it? Okay.
Claire, you're on mute.
Sorry. Just realised I'd just done that. Danette, it's because it's in the packs. We won't be showing the slides.
Okay, sure. Okay, so on page 226, I think this covers the points I'm going to be referring to here is on page 226 of your pack. So over the 3 quarters, the main headline numbers here. So over the 3 quarters, 69% of complaints submitted were resolved without formal escalation. Across all stages, 30% of complaints were upheld, 54% not upheld, and 16% undecided. Going on to page 228, essentially what we've seen over the 3 quarters compared to where we stood at the end of quarter 4 2021-22, complaints have increased by an average of 7%. This increase has mainly been caused by the rise in stage 1 complaints, which in turn was a result of a new housing complaints policy being implemented. The policy was introduced in May 2022 and removed the option of informal resolution. So there wasn't an option to resolve complaints early. The policy change, combined with seasonal factors, has seen housing services make up 40% of all complaints received, as compared to an average of between 25 to 30% over the period 2021-22. So that's quite a significant change. You can see that on page 229 of your packs. Of the 465 complaints that did not formally escalate, 345, 85%, were attributed to place and growth services. And over the 3 quarters, the council managed 258 unique formal complaints. I'm going to move now on to insights that have been noted by service teams within the council. This is mainly shown on page 227 of your pack. This period, quarters 1 to 3, showed how there can be unforeseen spikes in complaints. In November 2022, the media reported on how poor mould management by a social housing provider resulted in the tragic death of a toddler. This prompted concerns from our tenants, leading to an increase in service demand. And because that overwhelmed the service at the time, there was delays in that meeting that service demand, resulting in increase in complaints for housing services. Housing services responded to this issue by working with the tenants panel to devise a new mould and damp policy. Those complaints upheld tend to relate to delays in addressing or completing a request of service, such as mould concerns or seasonal factors, particularly boiler repairs with the cold snaps we've experienced. When and a key feature we've seen and noted is when a customer finds a decision unsatisfactory, they often confuse it with poor performance. These complaints tend to escalate and are usually not upheld. However, they do highlight opportunities for service teams to improve on how we can manage customer expectations with better information and communication. During this period, we saw several long-standing ombudsman cases reach a decision in favour of the complainant. Recommendations centred on ensuring statutory timeframes were met for educational healthcare plans, a review of how health assessments were sourced, and improved staff training to ensure those with neurodiverse conditions receive the appropriate level of understanding and assistance. This period has provided further evidence that when a complaint is unlikely to be resolved informally, it is to everyone's interest to signpost the complainant onto the stage 1 process. We have supported this guidance, that's the customer relations team, that's what Claire and myself are a part of, by engaging with staff through the 3C workshops and having responses reviewed through the quality assessor service. So, Chair, that's the end of my review.
Thank you very much. That's great. So I open it up to members for any questions or comments. David.
Thank you. I have a small number, but you know the 7% increase. Has any analysis been done that if informal resolution were still an option, whether this would be up or down? Because clearly that like for like is what we're looking to compare.
That's a really difficult one to answer because the Housing Ombudsman have basically said they cannot do early resolution or this informal process anymore. So it is likely that we would have stayed about the same or even gone down a bit because the early resolution has been working over the last few years.
Thank you. You also mentioned seasonal factors or seasonal adjustment, but I was wondering because these obviously compare the same periods, I know, across various years. What seasonal factors is that just the really hot weather we have causing extra complaints, or what was meant by that?
Is it okay for me to answer that? the cold snaps, Councillor, what we saw in December, as well as I think particularly what I mentioned was highlighted the mould issue. That has been an ongoing feature for housing services to deal with. But with that, the national media attention on that particular tragic incident in November, it highlighted the issue for a lot of tenants, and they put in concerns. They put their concerns to the housing services team, and these were more. They weren't real concerns, shall we say, but they were just because the media prompted them to actually say, "I don't know if I've got mould in my property. I should get the council to look at it." It was those sort of questions that overburdened the service at the time, and that's what led to complaints, because meeting that service demand, they just were so overwhelmed by the rise in demand that they couldn't meet it, which led to them receiving complaints because they weren't meeting these requests in a timely manner.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Mike?
I think I'm a local resident, and I guess unless you're in the process of having raised a complaint, it's difficult to understand how effective we are. Do you have any information with regard to how you compare with similar sized councils or neighbouring councils as well, for us to judge how effective you are? It's very difficult, one, the number of complaints and how you've dealt with and things like that, and trends, which might be very useful if you had that for someone. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure why this comes to the audit committee, but maybe you've answered. To me, in my experience, complaints normally go to the exec committee and the CEO. But putting that aside, I think for the reader, it'd be very useful to know how we compare with other councils, and then we can judge the effectiveness. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And could I just add on that? Can you just explain what does happen with this report? You know, who reviews it and how often? And I mean, I can see in the report you've got the sort of insight points, so actions obviously are coming out of it. But how does that process work? Just following on from what Mike was saying.
Okay,
so the first point is on the comparison with other councils. If you have any information on that,
I'll pass over to Dan, because he's done some benchmarking.
We have done some benchmarking exercises in the past, and we tend to do such exercises around when the LGSEO, that's the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, issued their annual reports for every local authority. Because when I've tried to do it in the past and tried to source the information from other local authorities, particularly around early resolutions, it's trying to compare apples and oranges, because some local authorities don't have a stage 1 or stage 2 complaints process. They sometimes go from stage 1 straight to the ombudsman. And so we have in the past, and we do this annually actually, we do compare ourselves against our neighbouring local authorities when the ombudsman issues their annual report, because that's issued on the same day for every local authority. And every local authority has access to the figures for the LGSEO figures. So in some way that gives you a good perspective of how we're performing, because it tells you how many complaints. It's comparing oranges for oranges, if you like. It's the same statistic. We're dealing with a comparative level of statistics. So that's what we used in the past. And we have got last year's annual report where we did I think we did a comparison with our local authorities, which we can get to you after this in next week or so.
Okay, thank you. And just on the point about who reviews the report and what is the process for this information, and that, you know, how you get actions out of it, etc.
The report does go over to CLT, and that will go over it because it's a quarterly report, and then we do a quarterly report, then the annual report. The annual report is published, so anyone can review that. We also go to individual directorates with their individual slides, and we ask them to we analyze it, but they will then be asked to go over it, check that the details are correct, and bring any learnings up from it. And of course, we have the complaints focus group, which has representatives from each area, each directorate, and we meet quarterly on that as well, prior to the annual report being done, and we review everything that's going on. So if there's any changes in the ombudsman's or just in general any changes that are going on, so that's the way we tend to feedback, is through the reps on a more day-to-day basis. So if there's any issues that have come up or highlighted, if there is a major concern on one area, we will go directly to the assistant directors. We also have our statistics, not very good with that word, on GovMetrics, which is our reporting for the calls and the phone, the calls, the emails, and on our website. So if there's any issues around that, we can address any insights that come out of that as well.
Okay,
hopefully that will answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maria.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I know this is to residents, and I'm looking at it from a councillor's point of view, but I do like the way that I've had some explanations coming back to me in terms of the way the answers have been framed, trying to understand the issue that I'm raising and giving reasonable explanations that convince me that actually this is the right thing. So I'd just like to feedback to staff. I think it's definitely improved.
Good, thank you for that. Mike.
Yeah, on page 232 pack, you have a page of equality monitoring data where you're looking at who actually raised a complaint. And I was just wondering, you've got an age bracket of 18 to 65, and that age bracket raised 70% of the complaints. Well, I'm not surprised, because it's such a huge range of ages, whereas you've got a plus 65, only 21%. And it's reasonable to assume that 65 only probably goes to about 85 on average before we fall off our perch. I just thought that perhaps we ought to break down the 18 and 65 a bit more to understand a little bit better who is raising these complaints. And actually, I quite like to understand that breakdown across each of the various different types of complaint as to whether or not particular age brackets are complaining about particular things.
Do you have any comments on that, Claire?
We always look at the equality monitoring. When we set it up, we did the age ranges. We are aware that they do go across quite a wide span. So we are looking at what we can do to improve that. So we do appreciate that comment, because it's something we were already looking at. We haven't actually broken down all the detail by complaint. It is something we could look at to analyse, if it's a particular area that all our waste complaints come in at plus 65, or that it could be whatever it is. So we could have a look at that, but it's not something we've broken down so far. We tend to use the equality monitoring for just doing a comparison at the moment. I know Dan was he's been doing the stats on this against the Berkshire Observatory. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, that's right. That's where we take the Berkshire Observatories. It provides the census data for Wokingham, but it's quite old and it needs updating. But they are comparative to what they are saying about Wokingham, in terms of it's not widely, it's on par with what they have in their census data, with what we're seeing come through via the complaints.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So maybe something to have a look at there. Any other points, Mike, again?
On page 238, the formal complaints for place and growth. In the explanatory notes at the bottom, the second bullet point talks about the volume of early resolution complaints increasing fairly substantially, and that they fell into a category one-off instance that by their nature have a negative impact. For explanation, road and emergency utility works causing traffic delays, causing traffic congestion and delay. I'm just wondering, the ephemeral nature of that sort of thing doesn't really mitigate against looking about escalation or specific outcome, because if it only lasts a day or two, it's disappeared before anybody's escalated it, I guess. So are we sort of kind of de-emphasising those sorts of problems because they kind of resolve themselves? See what I mean?
They do on occasions resolve themselves. We live in a world where people complain while they're in their queues. So we do get a lot of complaints that say the traffic light is not working correctly. They may not know that, but they're saying it's taken ages to get through here. It could be that they are actually out and there's a problem. But it's that sort of thing, that instant, I'm going to put in a complaint, and they come straight through to a complaint. Those are those instant one-off incidences that will last for 2 or 3 days. There was a change to some car parking payment machines a little while ago, and we had 2 or 3 weeks of exactly the same complaint. And it wasn't until they could put the new signage up. There was new signage, but it wasn't very clear. And those create those sort of what we would technically say is a one-off complaint. It's something that we know can be resolved quite quickly, but it's still a complaint from our customer perspective.
Okay, thank you. And Mike Drake?
Being slightly sarcastic, perhaps we ought to have a subcategory called City Fibre. That would help us.
I would agree with that.
I think that might be my cue to leave at this point.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, they are one of our biggest people that have been complained about quite recently.
David, yeah.
To declare a slight interest, as a management consultant, they're one of my clients, but no, we don't work on the civics. I know their COO is desperate to get any complaints registered, so do tell your constituents to complain, because they don't want to piss people off, because pissed off people don't buy services. So they will take action.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Any other comments on the report? No, all right, we'll move on. Thank you to the officers for their presentation.
Thank you.
And we will move on to internal audits next. So we've got 2 reports here for internal audits. The first is the Q3 progress report, and then we've got discussion on the internal audit plan. So over to you, Catherine. Please do take the reports as read. Right. So just pick out the main points for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is item 57 in the agenda pack, which is on pages 241 to 262. And it summarises the work of internal audit and investigation up to the end of December. I'm just going to pick out some key highlights from the reports. First of all, there are no new audits that were completed in Q3 that attracted the lowest category of audit opinion. That's category 3 and 4. We are on track to achieve the majority of the internal audit plan by the end of the financial year. There may be minimal carry forward into the next year. And in terms of high-risk concerns and follow-up activity, I know this is something members are particularly keen to keep an eye on. So I share the high-risk concerns with the chair of the audit committee, and we discuss at our monthly meetings. I have, however, summarised on pages 248 and 249 in terms of tables and graphs the number of high-risk concerns. So to the end of December, there were actually 8 high-risk concerns. 2 were due to be implemented, and they were implemented, and 6, the due date hadn't arisen yet. I've also included on page 250 a table of what those concerns actually are, so members can see the management countermeasures, the dates they're due to be implemented, and the current position as at the end of December. And then moving on to Appendix A1, which is an appendix you are familiar with. This all the audits that have been in progress to the end of December. Just to make it clearer for you, I've highlighted those in yellow, where there's been activity since the last meeting of the committee. So this report is coming to you to review and scrutinise progress to the end of December. This is a change to your terms of reference, because previously you noted the progress. So I've made that change in here. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I do think that just adding that table on page 250, just giving us that little bit of granularity on those items is really useful just to see what kind of things are coming up. So thank you for putting that in. Okay, questions from members. Maria?
I know I've asked this before. I don't understand the bottom table on page 249 again. I like tables to add up, and I can't reconcile in my head how it refers to the previous table, if it does at all, and how the 4 and 4, for example, in the first column relate to the 6 in the top. I'm sure I've asked this before.
Right, so there are 8 high-risk concerns in total. There were 2 that were closed because the actions have been implemented. We actually had 2 new concerns coming in during the period as well, so that makes it back up to the 8.
Can I just come in here very briefly? I think it adds up horizontally, but it doesn't add up vertically. So of the 6, 4 are open. It's not like you can't total the columns. Right? Yeah, so I think that's probably where you. Okay, other questions from members? No? Okay, I just had one on in terms of the resourcing. So obviously you've had one of the posts was being freezed during the year, but can we get assurance that you don't expect it to have any impact on your ability to give an opinion, because you're obviously getting through the audits that were planned, and that freezing of one of your posts is not going to have an impact on your ability to give that opinion when it comes to it.
So when I prepared the revised plan that came to members in September, I also took into account other assurance mechanisms that were in place. So we were fortunate to have had the peer review work and the follow-up from the peer review. There's a safety valve work going on. We knew Ofsted would be coming in at any time as well. So we were enabled to take on board that for this financial year.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move on. I think partly because the report is very, very clear now. That's why we don't have so many questions, because you laid it out so clearly. So thank you for those changes. Okay, moving on to the internal audit plan then. So page 27. So yes, I'll hand over to you, Catherine, just to introduce this one as well.
Thank you. So the second report is the internal audit plan, strategy, and an updated internal audit charter. So this is agenda item 58, and that is on pages 263 to 294. There are actually 2 parts to the report. The first part is the internal audit strategy, and that explains the approach to audit work over the coming year. And Appendix A1 has the work areas that are being proposed for us to cover during the year. And this will assist in informing the head of audit opinion on the internal control, risk management and governance framework. So in terms of putting together the strategy and plan, we take into consideration a number of areas: advice from our professional bodies, networking groups that we're part of. I also map the audits in the plan to the corporate risk register. This is to demonstrate that we're focusing our work on the key risks to the council. And I also visit directorate management teams to discuss their priorities, where audit can add value, and where we can assist them going forward. In addition to the key corporate risks, obviously there's what we do as well on the operational risk register and other activities such as risk management, governance building blocks, fraud activity, and other areas such as grant certification work. Following from discussions from the last audit committee, I know there was mention about having, say, a 3-year audit plan and demonstrating what coverage would on the key corporate risks would occur in each year. So on page 272, I've added a table into the pack which shows all the key corporate risks at the moment, and then the years in which we will be auditing them. Now, however, I have noticed a small error. Yes, I did notice that. So at the top of the page, the years have fallen off, I'm afraid. So the first year with the ticks in, that's 22-23 coverage. So that's the work I've just been reporting on. The middle one is 23-24. audit plan, which is in this pack, and then the other areas will pick up in 24-25. So apologies for that. I think it's also important to remember that the plan needs to remain dynamic and flexible because we're in uncertain times, and the risk register is, new risks are coming in and going out of that all the time. In terms of resourcing the plan, this assumes a senior auditor post that was frozen has been reinstated, and I have put a business case in to finance to ask for that to be reinstated. And there's also an apprentice role. Again, there's a business case we put forward for that. I'm pleased to say also that a business case for a corporate investigator has been recently approved. So we're looking to recruit to that. And that is in addition to the structure that was agreed by CLT back in April last year. So I think that should give sufficient coverage to inform the head of audit opinion from the work that we'll undertake. And I just want to say the second part of this report is the internal audit charter. And members have seen this before. It's a terms of reference for internal audit, and we present it annually alongside the audit plan, and just to ensure that we're complying with our professional standards still. So appendix item A2 shows the changes that have been made. There's not a significant number, and the appendix A3 is a clean copy of the audit charter. So overall for this report, I'm asking Audit Committee to review and scrutinise the internal audit plan and strategy, and to approve the internal audit charter.
Great, thank you very much, Catherine. Questions from members? Maria?
Okay, so on page 273, it says that the assumption is that these posts will be filled partway through the year after a recruitment process. In your opinion, will you be under-resourced if these posts are not filled?
We will be under-resourced to achieve the audit plan that's coming to you this evening, yes.
And the audit plan is, as far as you're concerned, necessary to make sure that everything is being done?
Yes, it is. Yes, yeah. Definitely.
Okay, so I'd like to know as soon as these posts are filled, or if there's any reason for any delay, and I wonder if that can be brought to a future committee. So it says partway through the year. I'm guessing that's 2023-24, or is it calendar year?
It's 23-24, so it's financial year.
So they should be filled by October.
I would hope so, provided the business cases are approved.
Yeah.
Then we would look to fill them straight away. But obviously there's time for advertising, taking references, etc., and people giving notice. So
yeah, I'd be interested.
I hope it would be before October, actually.
Yeah,
so
I'll be interested to know if the business case gets turned down, since this is obviously critical to resourcing and you need it to carry out this plan, which we are about to approve. So yeah, I'd like that to come to a future meeting and for that to be minuted. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, because it's all about whether you've got enough capacity to give your opinion, isn't it? And so the committee will keep track of that through talking to Catherine. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, other questions, comments from members? Mike.
Good clear paper, thank you. It's even answered it, which is great. I was looking back at the risk register we reviewed. It's really a matter of philosophy, whether those risks in the red area, so high incident, high risk, whether we ought to be covering that area every year, and then the others we cover maybe over a 3-year plan. I think we spoke before about. So I wonder whether the high risk areas we ought to be covering every year.
Yes, so just turning back to page 272, the budget and financial resilience is the top key risk to the council. And as you can see, we have got coverage of that every year. Make sure we reflect that through our
But risks 5, 7 and 8 we don't cover every year, I don't think, do we? Which are in our red, very high risk areas.
So 8 would be cybersecurity. So we had coverage 22-23, and we're proposing coverage next year as well. Do some follow-up work.
but we haven't got that in 24-25.
Not at the moment, no. But
and then the is it the SEND education, which has been an issue for the council? I don't think that's covered this year, and that's one of our high risk items.
That's because of the safety valve work that's been going on. So that's why we've taken some assurances. So we'll take assurances from the activity in that area.
Okay, so that's something to consider, basically, isn't it?
It is, and actually, if there is a response like that, we're not covering it this year because of this reason, maybe we should cover that, just to make sure we cover ourselves, that there's a reason why in a particular high-risk area to the council we're not looking at that this year.
So on the SEND one, there is an asterisk there to say external assurance safety valve in the description.
That's the year we're just finishing, isn't it? Not 23-24. Yeah, we've got the blank there. Okay.
Thank you. Just what a point of detail. We talked at this committee about minimum revenue provision. Where is that in our plan? Have we got an audit of that?
We haven't got that specifically. Okay. No. Okay. I think that's something that get picked up by external audit.
Okay. Other comments, Mike?
Yes. Really just very clearly laid out. That's the kind of thing I was struggling with. Because from an independence point of view, the internal audit team still sits within the finance. Section 5 deals with independence. And I just wondering, the internal audit team sits within the finance department in terms of its line management. Appreciate the following page, it says reporting regardless of line management, has access to all these people, but it just, there's a doubt in my mind as whether that's the best place for it to sit. I mean, maybe that's where it has to sit because it doesn't work otherwise.
Okay, so if I can explain, I have monthly one-to-ones with the chief executive to discuss audit issues, and I also have monthly one-to-ones with the chair of the audit committee. So if I do have concerns, I do have those pathways that I can go through to raise those.
Could I also add, actually, it's in the interests of the council's section 151 officer to use the internal audit to look at all the areas of risk and be alerted. So I understand the point that there is no place of complete independence because that's its own structure. But I think there's probably it's misunderstood in terms of a 151 isn't looking to make money off the stock market. A 151 is looking to have good governance, solid, reliable data and address risks. So the interests are often very mutually beneficial.
Okay, other points? Yeah,
it's really probably being really pedantic. But I know in section 5 as well, you mentioned that where you're going to be asked to do non-audit duties, that they would how they'll be handled. So I think by bringing in this qualifier of when you're going to be doing non-audit duties, it's made me feel if we had a bad actor who then piles you high with non-audit duties to divert you from your investigations, what prevents that from happening or being caught? Or is that, again, the chief exec and Rachel? I'm sure it's not a problem with anyone here, but always imagine the worst.
I mean, at the moment, we don't get involved in non-audit duties. It's just to cover ourselves if it were to happen. So other authorities that I've worked in, I have had non-audit duties to do, and this is a caveat to get around it, basically. So we just it's just recommended by our professional body that we have something in there just to capture that.
That's putting it in anywhere about something completely hypothetical. So that's fine, but that's fine.
Any other comments or questions? No? Okay, I think that's it for you then. Thank you very much, Catherine, for that. Okay, so we'll move on to the SIP Financial Management Code, and I think Graham is going to introduce this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose this illustrates my point that I just previously made. There is a best code of practice out there. There is no requirement for us to undertake an assessment against it or indeed report it to an audit committee. So it was in the interests of trying to assure ourselves and assure yourselves that this the financial management arrangements are safe, sound, but also it was undoubtedly going to identify areas where we could improve and develop and become more rounded in terms of our overall financial management arrangements. This started with us undertaking quite a comprehensive self-assessment, which is shown from page 299, and that process of self-assessment is quite enlightening and informing in itself. And having completed that, we then used Catherine's team to undertake a more kind of traditional audit approach against, okay, so you think you've done that, you're that well equipped, let's test it against using a standard audit process. And it came out as the second highest of the 4 scores, which tells us that we're in reasonable shape, but it also tells us there's areas for improvement. I think I would say from my perspective, it's great to know where we can improve our arrangements, and of course we will, and we'll take those actions forward. But it's also good to be able to say there's nothing fundamental and of substantial concern that I kind of lost sleep or anything. This was about attending to things like training, which is absolutely right. I don't think you can train enough, and I think we can certainly improve that. Our job description, some of our engagement with the broader stakeholding around setting budgets and so forth. So I'm not for 1 minute presenting this as we're fine and we're relaxed. I'm presenting this as we didn't have to do this, but we chose to do this in the spirit of good development and addressing risks. I think there was a very comprehensive internal audit undertaken, and although I was part of the process in terms of being interviewed at some stage, I was very arm's length in terms of Catherine's work, and hopefully Catherine will be able to vouch for that. So anyway, this is the spirit in which I offer this. It's good that we've done one. Many councils, well, very few have undertaken them. We did find 1 or 2 out there, maybe a handful, let's say, but not many. So it's a good baseline for us to understand where we're at and where we can make further improvements.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham. Questions from members on the report? Maria.
I'm just thinking about various areas of this report, particularly stakeholder engagement and business cases. So I ran various parts of the medium-term financial plan, for example, through various analysis tools that tell you what the reading age is, how clearly it's written, whether it's got passive sentences. And the reading age was that of Stephen Hawking's, what's that book he's wrote? Something of Time? Yeah, that's it. It was level with that. If we want to engage not just residents but councillors, we have to write in language that people understand. Otherwise, it's a barrier to engagement. I did make some suggestions which Graham took up, so I was pleased to see some of that. But honestly, we just got to look at it and use these tools to say, will residents understand this? Actually, will councillors understand it? Otherwise, nobody can see the wood for the trees, and it's not the way to communicate with residents if you actually want them to engage, nor with councillors, to be fair. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, to recognise it's a continual challenge making the council's finances intelligible to all. Will continue to try to improve, but I would also stress that the MTFP or the statement accounts, they're not the only ways we communicate the council's finances, and for example borough news and other forms and presentations. So I don't think there will be a way to to produce the statement of accounts and MTFP in a way that everyone would be able to understand, because it is unfortunately extremely complex. But I accept the general point, and to make the main documents as understandable as possible, but also recognise there are other forms of education and illustration of the council's finances.
Thank you. Other questions from members? Mike?
I mean, I agree with that. It's very difficult, particularly with all the different reserves you've got and reconciliation between funded and statutory basis and things like that. Very, very difficult. But I think that puts an onus on the narrative report at the front of accounts, and stakeholders very often don't get beyond that stage. The numbers are just so complicated. But it puts the onus on explaining that part of an annual report in a way that the average person can read and understand.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for bringing it. It's really helpful for us to see the report. And so thanks for bringing it here. Thanks for getting it audited as well. You know, so that just gives us that extra assurance on the financial management. So also, obviously, there's a few areas for enhancement that have been picked up. So could I perhaps ask that an update on this comes back at some point next year, just on those enhancements and how we're getting on with those? But thanks very much for the report. That's great. Oh, Mike.
Sorry, I did have one point, go back to the annual report, but actually it's connected to this and I forgot to mention it. We have a section in the narrative report and it talks about borrowings and cash balances we have. And in the commercial and corporate world nowadays, people use a term called net debt a lot. The net debt, which is not a statutory measure and has had some criticism because most PLCs refer to it. But actually, that is a good example of a summary that actually the reader of the accounts would understand rather than sort of just random numbers. So this is the net amount of borrowings. And I know it's difficult because of different maturity dates and different things. But the reader of the accounts would say, yeah, you know, net, we borrowed 200,000, 250, million, 250 or whatever it was. So that's an illustration to make it condensed and a bit more easy, I think, for readers of the accounts to understand. So I got to mention that earlier on. It's a term very often used now as net debt, actually a lot. And we'll notice we haven't done that in the accounts.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on to the last item, which is the annual reports of this committee. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Obviously, outlines our activities and addresses whether we've been effective or not in terms of assurance and risk. This will go to council in March. So I don't know if Andrew, you wanted to add anything before we open it up? No. So yeah, any amendments or changes or welcome, basically. David.
No change. Just to Maria's point earlier, I was impressed by how readable this document was to take something which is a very complicated. I'm lost half the time in these meetings, and it will extremely easily convey what we do to our councillors, but I think to our constituents as well, because audit's boring. This actually brings to life what it means as well. Audit is not seen as the most fascinating subject by many of our constituents as compared to potholes, but it does really bring to life what we do. So well done, and thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Andrew. I presume you both had a bit heavy hand in that.
Any other comments on the report or changes that people would like? No? Okay, that was easy. Thank you very much. Right, I think we've come to the end of our business. This is actually our last meeting of the year, unless something else happens that we aren't expecting. We have got through an awful lot of business, I think, with this year. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank particularly the officers for supporting the committee so well, and also to all the members for all your very valuable contributions. So thank you for that. I think we've done pretty well and got through a lot of business. So thank you, everyone. And I will close the meeting there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.